Hi, and welcome back to my channel. Today's book review is for The Thread Collectors by a pair of authors, Shaunna J. Edwards and Alyson Richman. Now, before we talk about the book, I want to talk about the author's note. I want to tell you about why they wrote this book, so I'm just going to read a few lines. The idea behind The Thread Collectors has been in our hearts for many years, but in the early summer of 2020, as the world wrestled with growing awareness of racialized violence and inequality, we decided to harness our creative energy to find beauty in that darkness. The novel is loosely inspired by our own backgrounds and is born free from our decades-long friendship as a Black woman and Jewish woman, each proud of their heritage. We wanted to explore the Civil War experience through two unrepresentative lenses and illuminate the important and often overlooked tragedies of this era. I mean, what a great backdrop for what ended up being a fabulous story. Now, we have, as mentioned, our authors have been friends for decades, one Black, one Jewish. So in this book, our characters are one Black, one Jewish. We meet Stella, who is a slave that has taken on a task, and her task is to stitch maps on old cloth that help slaves flee slavery, and some of these slaves join in the Union Army. That is in 1863, I believe, New Orleans, Civil War. And then in New York, we have Lily, who's Jacob's wife, and she is an abolitionist, and her husband is also in the Union Army, and she's desperate for his return. So we have those four characters. We have Stella and William, and we have Lily and Jacob. Stella and William are Black slaves. Lily and Jacob are Jewish. How do these four lives intersect? Okay. Now, what we have here is what brings Jacob and William together. What brings them together during a time when racial inequality was rampant? Well, the main thing that brings them together is their love of music. They were both savants, or just beautifully talented when it came to music, and that's what brought these together. And I remember a part of the story where Jacob is playing music, or music is being played in Jacob's camp, and eventually the soldiers, they go to bed. But Jacob hears more music being played, and he follows the sound of that music. Now, he's in the Union Army, and the other group of people were in the Union Army, but they were segregated. So he finds this other group of musicians, and they are Black musicians, and he is so drawn by their music. And that's how these two men become friends at a time when this just really didn't happen. Now, there's another thing to consider. William may not have been a slave at that time that he was in the war, but he still had that segregation that affected many, if not most, of the Black soldiers. But what he had was those exceptional musical skills, and that did give him more freedom. And it's actually how he came across, met Stella, and eventually escaped. Now, while you read this book, you're going to find out some very sad things that happened during the war. Now, as an example, when Jacob enters the camp with the Black soldiers, the first thing he notices is pretty much depraved conditions. Now, living on the battlefield, so to speak, where there's war, you're not living in glory. But the conditions that the white soldiers lived in compared to the conditions the black soldiers lived in was night and day. So that was something that caught my attention while I was reading the story. And then certain historical events that came through the pages of this novel, our authors did exceptional research because they incorporated actual historical events in the pages of this fictional novel. Then I want to talk about Stella and Lily. Now, Stella had a sister named Emily, and they were very, very close, but they had difficult circumstances that they were dealing with. In fact, their relationship changed. It kind of morphed into something different. But then we wonder, at what point does Stella meet Lily, and how is that friendship born? In fact, can that friendship turn into love despite the racial differences that existed? Because like I said, we're talking 1863. So another thing I wanted to mention is, as mentioned, we have New Orleans and we have New York. So we have two stories that are being told simultaneously in this book. And those two stories, as I mentioned, eventually become intertwined. But for most of the book, you're reading about Willie and his story, and over here you're reading about Jacob and his story, or Willie and Stella, and then Jacob and Lily. Now, both Stella and Lily were very crafty when it came to the needle. What do I mean by that? Well, Stella was embroidering these detailed maps, and these maps were used in an incredible way during the war. And then with Lily, she was very skilled when it came to creating quilts. So there's embroidery and there's quilting. So I love that. That is why I think the book is called The Thread Collectors. As a matter of fact, if you look closely at the cover, you'll see that they're each holding strands of thread, or they're holding a strand of thread together, or strands of thread together. Now, one of the things that I enjoyed about this book was the pacing. It was smooth, it was flawless, and it made this book into literally a page turner. It kept me riveted to these stories, and especially the bonds of friendship at a time when race severed or would have a natural, a line being drawn between Jewish and Black. Now, if you look at books that you're reading, like say, for example, if you're reading on your Kindle, or if you're reading a print book and you see the word Black in the book, Black is capitalized. Well, out of respect for the differences in the lives of these two women, or Jacob and William, white is also capitalized in this book. So that was just an extra thing that these authors did to play this out to where you can't help but feel for everybody involved. Excellent, excellent, excellent book. Also, the last thing I want to mention is our authors. Alyson Richman is a historical fiction novelist, but this is Shaunna Edwards' debut novel. So I love the fact that they came together as friends and created this incredible story, a story of love, friendship, and what united them, whether it was music or whether it was the embroidery of these maps, and how it helped to keep everybody, or as many people, safe as could be possible during those difficult times. Now, I don't often read much about the Civil War. Most of the historical fiction books that I read are based on World War II. So to read a book that was based on the Civil War was an extra bonus, because there was just so much there regarding what actually went on between the Blacks and the whites that served in the war during that time. And then the last thing that I want to mention is how wonderful, if I didn't already say this, that two friends who have been friends for decades could get together and write such an amazing book. So that's going to be it for the Thread Collectors. And one last time, it is by Shaunna J. Edwards and Alyson Richman. Alrighty, thank you for watching. Bye-bye.